On August 5th of 2012 at the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin in Oak Creek, we had an individual by the name of Wade Michael Page, who was a white supremacist, and he lived in a neighboring community. He had decided that day to come to the temple, and we haven't really determined why, and shot numerous people in the temple. He went outside the temple in the parking lot first, encountered some people in the lot as they had just had their services, and he did shoot 2 people in the parking lot. He then went back into the temple and walked through it shooting methodically. He knocked on doors and waited for people to open doors. They didn't know who it was. They opened doors and he shot them.
Hello, I'm Jamie Cook, Program Director for the Arkansas State Police. My role within my agency is to develop and update policies, procedures, and training. I am responsible for researching and analyzing state and federal laws and trends that pertain to agency operations. I serve as a commissioner on the Arkansas Commission on Law Enforcement Standards and Training and hold a senior law enforcement certificate. Welcome to the Violent White Supremacist discussions produced by the FBI Training Division for the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI National Security Branch, and our state and local law enforcement partners. The Department of Homeland Security would like to thank the FBI and the International Associations of Chiefs of Police for their collaboration and partnership in developing the series. Thanks to the agencies that have allowed their members to participate in today's discussions. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that the views expressed by the speakers do not necessarily reflect those of the FBI, DHS, or its law enforcement partners. Let's meet our panel. Supervisory Special Agent Kyle Loven serves as the Chief Division Counsel for the FBI Minnesota Field Office. SSA Loven has been with the FBI for 18 years, serving both the San Diego and Minneapolis divisions. Sergeant Jamin Martinez serves the Sacramento Sheriff's Department in California. Sergeant Martinez joined the Sheriff's Department 12 years ago, spending the first 6 of those years as a gang detective. He has worked with several federal agencies and the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Captain Michael Ritchie is commander of the Criminal Investigations Division with the Greensboro Police Department in North Carolina. He is a 19-year veteran. Jeff Woodworth is an intelligence officer for the Department of Justice Bureau of Prisons. Officer Woodworth also serves on the National Joint Terrorism Task Force. He is the assistant team leader of the Correctional Intelligence Initiative. The initiative's main focus is to prevent prison radicalization and to encourage the effective exchange of intelligence regarding terrorism matters within the prison systems. Thanks to all of you for making time in your busy schedule to join us for the Violent White Supremacist panel discussion. SSA Loven, for the purpose of establishing a common frame of reference in this discussion, can you provide us with the definition of white supremacist extremist?
Sure, Jamie. The definition of a white supremacist extremist basically is an individual who has an inherent belief in the superiority of white people as opposed to other persons. That belief, coupled with a propensity or threatened violence or direct action against others who are not of the white race, basically sets white separatist extremists apart from those who just harbor the beliefs. We in the FBI obviously are very concerned about extremists, not so much about their beliefs. The beliefs, as repugnant as they may be, are protected under the First Amendment to the Constitution. But when you couple those beliefs with the threatened or actual use of violence in trying to further the goals of white extremism, that is obviously a concern to law enforcement, and that's where law enforcement generally becomes involved with respect to these groups.
Very good. Thank you so much. Captain Ritchie, can you describe the types of crimes that are most often associated with white supremacists in North Carolina and who their main targets are?
Certainly. Our main issues in North Carolina are going to be pretty consistent throughout the U.S., which is the crimes targeted are those of violence. Typically, our white supremacists are like other criminals to some extent. They go at their crime as a matter of opportunity. They're doing their crimes for a couple of reasons. One, to posture, to really gather attention and get acceptance by their groups. So it'll be a violent act such as striking someone unexpectedly, maybe attacking someone who's by themselves, something along those lines, punching, hitting, beating up for posturing, to get status within and to draw attention to their groups. That's what we've seen as the main type of crime we have. Obviously, some other crimes that we have are those things to furtherance their issue, rather to make money or something along those lines. However, their efforts in our area are not as sophisticated as, say, our international terrorism groups and how they are going about making the money. They're just not as well organized and into the fraud and financial schemes that I don't think they have the wherewithal to begin that as we do in the international terrorism scene.
Firearms charges seem to be kind of a violation of choice when it comes to some of these groups. So for some reason that seems to be the low-hanging fruit, if you will.
There is an inherent belief that they need as many as they can get, and it doesn't matter what kind. The white power ideology, all these guys love their guns. They love more than one. And that's a common theme you see from East Coast to West Coast. The other thing that we see that you've also mentioned is the narcotics trafficking. Depending on the set and the ideology, you may have a group that absolutely will not use any type of narcotic, but prescription meds are okay. Or, as I know of a guy in Sacramento, he won't use anything, but he loves steroids. So you have to think outside the box. It's not going to be your meth or your coke. It might be something totally different. Steroids are still a crime. So you have to kind of think outside the box when you're looking at some of these guys. Each one's going to be a little different.
The internet is a hub for a lot of things for them, communications and also for making money. The primary leader in our area for white supremacy does have a studio and has a mail order business that sells anything you can think of that ties to white supremacy, whether it's KKK or Hammerskins or Glory Skins or any of the skinhead movement. And they sell that, and then that also organizes them in a manner of being able to get together and meet each other as well. It opens the door for that and the growth of their beliefs.
Music for the white power movement is huge. You can't deny it. For me in particular, at least in Northern California, we have a guy named Charles DeMar. Charlie's currently in custody, but he is the lead singer of a band called Stormtroop 16. Now, whether or not they continue to be a band during his incarceration has yet to be, remains to be seen. However, I know Charlie has traveled the world spouting his hate beliefs using his music. And he would travel, 1 month he'd be in Tennessee, the next month he might be in Florida. And what needs to be expressed here is that the bands, all of them, there's probably a couple hundred of them, it's a traveling circus, and they can communicate with each other through the music, at concert venues, at different events, and it's not just within the U.S. You have bands from the U.K. coming over, bands from the U.S. going to the U.K., Australia, Germany, they're traveling all over. And this globalization, if you will, of this movement really has a lot to do with the music and their ability to travel. It's huge.
In the Middle District of North Carolina, our active criminal white supremacy is housed completely around the music. We have a studio in our city that is utilized, and then it's also a large warehouse space that's then utilized for the parties and the concerts as well. So a band will come in, they'll record. When they record, they finish their recording, and then they throw a concert that evening. And that's where they're raising their money to provide for the party. We've had two significant contacts with white supremacists in the last 6 months. Both of those have stemmed after parties at the concerts and are very obvious in their beliefs by their actions. At this point, they've obviously, like most, have had a good bit to drink and are spouting their beliefs for anyone and everyone to hear. So we've come in contact with them as law enforcement officers. And so that also ties into that. We've had bands from California, from Michigan, from Maryland, all over come in to Greensboro to give these concerts.
And one thing that should probably be discussed too is the concerts are fantastic for investigatory purposes. If you have a white power band coming to your neck of the woods to throw a concert, you need to be there. You're going to have people from all over the country, most likely, showing up at this concert. You have a high level of alcohol being consumed. Everybody's wearing their dress gear, for lack of a better term. And after a while, there's the part of these guys that wants to show off. So it's highly likely you're going to have some sort of hate event shortly after a concert. It happens quite a bit in California. Apparently, it's probably happened in Greensboro. So these concerts, they need to be taken seriously, regardless of the size of the band or how well they are known. you just have to pay attention to these musics.
And I think the concerts, by and large, have taken the place of the old time speeches and sermons, if you will. I think that the music has served as a vehicle for a lot of these individuals to coalesce around, and as was stated earlier, I think that is now used primarily as the vehicle to get out messages they communicate through these concerts and whatnot. And I think that has taken the place of your more traditional communications for a lot of these groups.
Agent Logan, let me ask you this. With respect to monitoring the First Amendment protective activities such as concerts and speech, what specific activities should investigators be mindful of, and how does law enforcement minimize infringing on those protected rights?
Well, right. Well, I can speak for the FBI, obviously, is that before the FBI can investigate or review circumstances for investigation, we have what's called predication. We have to have that law enforcement purpose to take a look at a group. It's not as simple for the FBI to learn of a concert and just go to surveil or monitor a concert without predication. And that predication can come in the form of perhaps a bona fide subject attending or a number of bona fide subjects attending this event, which would suggest that criminal activity is going to be afoot here.
Even at the local level, you have to have that predication. There normally are going to be subjects of interest and of previous hate bent to attend these shows. So our guys are almost to the point of being a gang, where again that gang monitor and committing the crimes for the furtherance of the gang, you have that guys and that ability to work them from that angle.
Yeah, and that's what we see, is we see the event is what it is, it's an event. But who goes to the event typically for us is going to be one of our local gang sets, and quite a few of them, and some from outside of California. We'll have probation guys there, we'll have parole guys on parole there. We'll have information about maybe some drug dealing that's expected to go on. We have lots of indicators that tell us probably need to go and look at it and just kind of hang out and see what's going on.
I think sometimes the perception can be that law enforcement is simply monitoring these events just to monitor them. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of times some of the privacy advocates become involved, and they say, they accuse law enforcement of simply monitoring these events just for the sake of doing so. And again, I think the predication has been touched upon very clearly here, that predication must exist before these events are reviewed.
And don't forget the larger social issue of the protection of the community at large. When you have a large group, you pretty much have to monitor any protest, not for the content of the protest by any means, but for the safety of those protesters and to protect their First Amendment rights to protest. In 1979, we had 5 protesters killed in a white supremacist act. So as a result, our department takes the protection of anyone on any side and their ability to get out there and give their message very seriously.
At these concerts, you're going to see a lot of women, a lot of skin birds. The women are huge. The women keep the movement alive. Keep in mind, these guys go in and out of prison quite a bit. There's a common theme that the women don't always go to prison. And the women, they're the communicators. They're the ones that are holding the guns. They're the ones that are moving the things from point A to point B. They are a common thread in this movement. And I think sometimes people get short-sighted and they focus on the skinhead and maybe not the skin bird, when you have to take the totality for what they are. They are both of the same ideology, and they both are trying to further their cause. One typically goes to prison more, one typically doesn't. So the women tend to be a little bit more involved than people realize.
And I can echo that. We see that within the monitoring of the communications of our individuals associated with white supremacy and extremism, that individuals, particularly the females, generally the ones that are the mail drops, they are the ones that are doing the coordination. They're the ones that the communication hubs, as well as providing financial support to the individual that's in custody. But I also wanted to touch upon the notion before regarding the international sort of event that we have here. is that increasingly we're seeing, particularly when it comes to white supremacy extremism, is more of an international flavor. We are seeing individuals reaching out to our ideologues, particularly our really seminal individuals in custody that are associated with the movement from overseas, from Norway to Sweden to other parts of the world, reaching out to them and largely unsolicited sort of fan mail. Which is sort of an emerging trend, and I think that's part of the promotion that they're receiving online and the sort of ease of communication, or at least identifying where the location is that we have now.
Absolutely. There's white power social networks that allow this communication to occur very easily. If you have a smartphone and it's connected to the internet, we could be talking to a white power Nazi from Sweden in 1 minute and perhaps a guy from Greensboro in the next minute. It's easy.
Monitoring the internet is a must for an intel unit to really work to get these guys. It's a must. However, nothing beats human contact and human intel. I think everybody understands that you have to have that focus. So one of the things that we found that works really well is we've identified, as have other jurisdictions, we've identified those people that are running the show, so to speak, in our area. And we make regular contact with them. We visit with them. We go and see them. We say, hello, how are you doing? What are your plans today? What are your plans next week? When's your next concert? Who's coming to it? You know, we can't wait to see you that weekend. And they know that we're going to be monitoring the concerts. And as a result, the organizers will tend to try their best to put a squash and put a clamp on anyone from going out and doing the activities that we spoke about earlier. And that's going to be one of the keys, is that, you know, watching is great, but you have to make contact if you want to prevent the crime from occurring in the first place. They have to understand that you're aware of what they're doing and that it's important to you and it's important to your community that they not do it. And when you make that contact, you'd be surprised at how much you can hammer down. We've stopped concerts in neighboring communities. We've stopped events from happening that were going to happen on the same weekends as, say, a gay pride event that was going to happen in a neighboring city. There was also going to be a white supremacist activity go on then. Well, we made sure that didn't happen. And the way we did that was by making those contacts and really kind of pushing that out and saying, you know, you're going to bring a lot of unwanted attention to yourselves. And that's very important to go as well. And I'm sure that's been some of your experience as well.
Yeah, you have to say hello. I mean, you cannot hide behind the secret squirrel veil and just do surveillance and never say hi. If they know you're watching and they know you're there, and they'll get to know your name and they'll ask you all kinds of questions and you can ask them all kinds of questions. But for better or for worse, you kind of have to establish this, hey, we're here. You guys are entitled to your First Amendment rights, but we're going to be kind of keeping track to make sure nothing else goes too crazy. And you'd be surprised, some of these guys actually respect the fact that you're willing to walk up to them, knock on their door, and go, hi, we're here. Let's talk.
Mm-hmm. And that's a part of a little pitch I can make for correctional intelligence, is that, you know, there's a significant population of individuals that subscribe to this ideology in custody, and corrections does an admirable job in collecting all that information. We need to coordinate with the correctional community as well as with probation and law enforcement to exchange that information so you can know who is being released is in your domain, so that you can approach those individuals and you know what they were subscribing to while in custody. Because an individual that went in, maybe not affiliated while in custody because he had really no other choice, not subscribed to this ideology, is back home, here's an opportunity for you to do an interdiction, for you to approach him, to you to gather intelligence and see who he's associating with.
Yeah.
Right, and in keeping with that, as much as I applaud, and all of law enforcement applauds the overt actions, we also, speaking for the FBI, once we've identified certain individuals within groups. Obviously, we're very mindful, as I stated in the opening, with respect to civil liberties and privacy, and we don't want to be necessarily looking at groups where the propensity of violence does not exist, but the intelligence which comes from confidential human sources as well. Kind of goes without saying, but if we really want to get the pulse as to what's happening with respect to some of these groups. And again, I'm talking about the violent groups or those groups who have shown a propensity towards violence. There's no substitute for human intelligence covertly.
Absolutely. In full agreement. The main way of communicating right now is internet. You've got the social networks that he's talked about, but you also have plain old Facebook. Plain old Facebook. It doesn't even have to be a white supremacist website anymore. They're talking back and forth on Facebook, as are the other billion of us that happen to be on there in one way or another. So they're discussing that way. But where they are testy is they'll talk to you in this caged front, but they're going to want to meet you. And when they meet you, you have to have that meeting held and have it, to say sponsored, I guess is the best way to do it. You have to be sponsored by someone. Because that way, if you don't work out, you tend to be if you're the infiltrator or you're the person they just end up not liking, they want to have someone to blame and discipline for bringing you to the group. And the reason why I'm kind of walking through this is that one of the things we've noticed is that our guys are starting to mimic outlaw motorcycle gang behavior. They've been doing it for a while, but it's becoming a little more formal. And the communications are going the same way. We're actually seeing hammer skins and Old Glory skins that are prospecting now, just the exact same way that you did in outlaw motorcycle gangs, straight down to a T-shirt. In fact, we have one of our violent music fests, so to speak, back in 2008, 2009. We conducted intel at there, and that's where we first met Wade Michael Page of the Sikh temple shooting. He's wearing a Prospect T-shirt right there in the middle of this concert group and conducting business. He's the one that paid for the pizzas. He's the one that stood outside and handed security over the cars to make sure they weren't messed with at the concert, because that is a tactic that they use and a communications piece they use. The Prospect does all that communicating, the same as with the outlaw motorcycle gangs. So if anyone gets in trouble, it's going to be the one that doesn't know anything.
And the biker angle is huge. Absolutely, without a doubt, we have a cross-breeding going on. It's probably different from state to state and region to region. However, in California, it's interesting that you hear you talk about this. We have the Vagos MC in California. Typically, they're Hispanic, especially in Southern California. However, the Sacramento group is predominantly white. Members of that group are either former gang members of a white power group in Sacramento or from somewhere else within the region. So what we see some of these white power ideology types moving into motorcycle gangs and some coming back. And then we also see the whole concept of being a prospect within the biker world moving its way into the skinhead environment, where you can't just walk up to the local skinhead group and become a member. There's a little bit more of a requirement going on now, and they refer to it as being a prospect. It's interesting to see the dynamics and the switch go back and forth. So they're learning. And if they start organizing themselves on a national level like the Hells Angels do, that could be very interesting. It's going to be a future problem.
Right now, our Old Glory skins are aligning themselves with Hells Angels, and our Confederate hammer skins are aligning themselves with the Outlaws. And that's something that we're seeing. It's something that is worrisome, because you've got ideology-based crime, and now you've got just plain profit-based crime merging together. And that's going to create very interesting dynamics for the growth of both white supremacy and motorcycle gangs.
And let's face it, if you're a biker group and you want a good, solid crew member, skinhead's a great place to recruit from. Fantastic. You've got a guy who pretty much already knows how the system works, understands the ideology, the mentality, and now you're getting the ability to make money. They're going to be quite happy.
Officer Woodworth, can you discuss the white supremacist extremist activities in the prison system and the role they play with extremists outside the prison system?
Absolutely, Jamie. What we see is that individuals that are associated with the white supremacy extremist movement tend to remain somewhat operational while they're in federal custody. Additionally, we find that these individuals attempt to radicalize and recruit, and they attempt to remain in contact either illicitly or overtly with their organizations that they're affiliated with. It's important to remember that prison really is a very different environment. It is the one case that you're actually going to see individuals who are extremists literally having a captive audience to recruit and draw from. So we take the whole white supremacist extremism sort of mindset very much into our classification instrument to ensure that those individuals aren't able to proselytize their belief set. Now, what we also see is individuals that believe in the white supremacy extremists attempt to, within the inmate population, continue their activity. But what we're also finding, which was interesting, what you're saying about the internet, is those individuals that are white supremacy extremist ideologues, the ones that were significant players in broader movements or actually in attacks, are within the community luminaries. And we receive they receive communications, and we intercept communications both nationally and internationally to some of these individuals. We see a growth in those individuals who are promoting the work of David Lane. His 14 words and 88 precepts are iconic statements that we see within individuals that follow this community, and those individuals that are active within the federal prison population. We also see individuals that are connected to groups such as the National Socialist Movement. They actually have a prison outreach program that are directly reaching out to the inmate population, trying to draw those individuals in. We're also seeing a slight change in what was previously largely a neo-Nazi or National Socialist sort of approach to one that's more based in Nordic ideology, into Viking sort of symbolism. We're seeing a corresponding approach with those individuals who believe that, following a faith tradition that is legitimate faith tradition of either Odalism or Asatru. We're also seeing a growth in that sort of symbolism, particularly when they're communicating. We're seeing them utilize runes as ciphers, which is a runic code, which is a change in what we've seen in the past. We see within our more sophisticated groups is the use of ciphers. And this is an opportunity, if you do run across something that you're not quite sure of, is make use of the FBI's cryptanalysis group and utilize their code-breaking skills. Because some of these are quite sophisticated and probably not something that anybody other than a dedicated professional might have an opportunity to crack.
Absolutely. I've used them before. They work great.
Good stuff.
Sergeant Martinez, what's your experience in the county correctional system? How is that different from the federal system, maybe?
I think it might be just a smaller version. It's not that much different. At the county level, especially in California where we have a huge prison population, you go into our custody setting, you're basically forced to pick a side. Hispanic, African American, Asian, it doesn't matter. What we see though typically is the white groups will come together under a common ideology. You just kind of have to. There are some differences in that we have one local group that's kind of born and bred in Sacramento. They were founded under a white power ideology, and while they may spout that rhetoric, that's only holds true typically when we see them go into custody. Outside of custody, they associate with whoever they want, which is a little bit different. But when they go to prison, just like he was talking about, they get together and they all believe in the same ideology, and it's probably a numbers game. The reality is they're outnumbered. And so just by the sheer volume of safety and their own beliefs, they get together. So we have plenty. They do associate at the state level, from the county to the state to the federal level. At some point, they're in the system and they're all chit-chatting with each other. And the inmates held within actively communicate on a daily basis with the people on the streets. I know for me in particular in Sacramento, we have several people that are communicating with members of the order on a fairly regular basis. At one time, a gentleman named David Lynch, who's now deceased, was basically doing fundraising for members of the order who were in federal custody in hopes when they get released that they would have money to get an apartment, buy a house, and things of that nature. And that activity still continues. And so when you take people who have this ideology and who are organized, and granted not all of them are organized, and you get them on a mass national scale, working with each other, finding ways to make legitimate money, earning money to fund other adventures, if you will, the threat becomes a little bit bigger and a little bit more unique in that it's different than your typical street gang mentality. These guys are more organized, and that's a big difference.
And I think in keeping with that organization, at least in Minnesota and the Dakotas, which my field office covers, we've found that members of these groups, they always presume that law enforcement is listening in. And so they have taken great pains to be protective about their communications. And so that's something else, it's a hurdle that law enforcement seems to be facing.
And I'd also like to go back to the role once they leave the prison. And one of the things we were discussing beforehand, if I'm a member of the old Glory Skins, I might very well join ranks with some NSM members who NSM doesn't have much to do with North Carolina whatsoever. However, in prison, I need those numbers. So one of the negatives of the prison system, obviously, is that they're getting exposed to all of the ideology in those manners on white supremacy. So it's not just your Viking heritage, it's not just your hammerskin violent message, it's not just your KKK, down with blacks message. It is very much all of those put into one shell so that when they come out, they have more resources. And that's a worry for all of us, is that they might have the ability to reach out, might have the wherewithal to reach out, whereas prior to that, they would stay very closed into their own sessions.
Yeah, the philosophy tends to be one that is largely along the lines of somewhat neo-Nazi, definitely very white ethnic based. Those are the ways that they look at it, and you find that they're actually, their association is very fluid. They can be actually members of different organizations at the same time and claim that they are, Vineland Group. They can be skinheads. They can be, Aryan Resistance Movement, all at the same time. So there's a commonality between those groups. You also find, as far as what they identify as being their enemies, those individuals that are non-whites, those individuals that are in a position of authority, and individuals that are members of the government or employed by the government. Those are the commonalities that you find within that sort of subset of that ideology.
Yeah, I think in keeping with that, I think that it's almost a public relations ploy in a sense of these people understand that to mainstream America and to society at large, these beliefs are abhorrent, repugnant, and this may be a way to try to soften that image. I mean, you still hold strength, you still hold to your racist beliefs, if you will, but again, distancing away from some of the more unseemly rhetoric, I think, is almost a public relations move on the part of some of these groups.
Well, the other side of it is it's also a grasp at grabbing the Constitution to protect you. People don't want the attention at times because they recognize, and this goes back to why they're saying Odinism and why they're doing this, is to try to push the attention off them because although they do have the peacock mentality, as you mentioned, they recognize that there's going to be larger issues if everyone is aware. So one of the things we want to look at is how do we prevent crimes like this from occurring? Yes, their behaviors are, as you mentioned, still violent, often still very much race-based, but what they're doing is they know as police officers that we're really worried and concerned, especially on the local level, of any type of civil rights or violating this. And so if I throw what I'm doing behind a religion, then the belief is at the local level we don't have the resources or the care to put the effort into seeing the difference between the actual behavior of the violence versus the statement of, no, this is my religion. That's key. You have to investigate. You have to be involved. We know what our reasons when we cannot investigate. But what we have to be careful about is not to get scared of an investigation because someone says, no, this is freedom of religion, I'm Odinistic, when in reality, that's the public relations curtain they've thrown over their behavior. So if their behavior is violent, if they have that tendency and they spout the violent beliefs, then you have to monitor it. You have no choice.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, it's also a recruiting tool, as you alluded to. I mean, it's much easier to recruit perhaps potential members who are on the fence with some of this more public relations friendly rhetoric than perhaps some of the in-your-face hardcore rhetoric that some of these groups are known for.
Captain Ritchie, this is for you. Your jurisdiction has significant experience dealing with white supremacist extremists. Can you share some of your insight into how the groups are interconnected and what mechanisms they use to communicate and coordinate across jurisdictional boundaries?
Certainly. We've hit some of that already in this conversation, and it's gone pretty well. But right now, in the intercommunication between groups, what we found in North Carolina is that you have I'm going to throw this to kind of simple terms, but old school KKK type ideas floating around, and we have some KKK organizations still within North Carolina, quite a few actually. But what we've noticed about those guys is that they're primarily an older set. However, right now they're trying to recruit. This will go right into how they're working together. They're trying to recruit, but the speed at which they work is not happy, does not create the happy 20-year-old white supremacist. They want more adrenaline, they want more of the rush, they want more of the attention, and they need that. So again, what we find is they get involved in the music, they get involved in that social scene, at which time the KKK says, wait a minute, we're kind of done with you. And so the KKK pushes them out. So now you've got people who are in North Carolina, our number one group is the Old Glory Skins as far as when it comes to skinhead organizations. And the Old Glory Skins, they have the contacts because many of them started, recruited, grew up around these KKK members. So they have the combination, they have that connection to each other. Then they run into others like the Vinlander Social Group and like some of our other Confederate Hammerskins, which are now on the outs with the Old Glory Skins. But they run into them, they know each other. They have their free flow organization when they're not with their groups. And they don't mind if well, publicly we don't get along. But privately, I might give them a call and check in with them and see what's going on. So that happens a lot. So there's a lot of sharing of information and sharing of tactics.
The lower profile seems to be the philosophy which is carrying the day now, because I think we've talked about hate crimes, we've talked about some of the severe penalties which accompany those types of convictions, and just the overall publicity with respect to some of the actions that these groups are responsible for. And I think you're seeing a general, and I think this speaks for the entire country, a general softening or lowering the profile of some of these groups as a general philosophy nationwide. And I think that's a byproduct of what we're seeing here with not only the investment, not only the efforts of law enforcement, but just the general trend.
But you're also seeing that because of the federal sentencing guidelines, that individuals that are espousing this sort of extremist rhetoric aren't really necessarily moving towards violent activity all that often. You think about the Martin Luther King Day attempted bombing by Harpfong, and the individual received 360-month sentence, 30 years, and he was basically a lone offender simply because there was really no one else that would go with him on that sort of mission because he understood the ramifications. And again, you're seeing this high impact, but again, it appears to be at this point kind of a low frequency event, if that would be something people would agree with.
High risk, low frequency.
Yeah.
And to go in there, I would say that they're not doing it, to clarify, I'd say they're not doing it on their own as much as they're doing it in response to the efforts of community-based actions, to the efforts of federal prosecution, state prosecution, and local attention.
What advice can you provide to your peers across the country?
I'll jump in on that one, and I'm sure we'll get some backing up on this. Number one thing is don't ignore it. We have our head in the sand on a lot of things until something big happens, and then we play catch up. And why did that happen? So if you have this in your area, work it. Again, we talked about the simple piece. You have your complex long-term investigations, which that would be a whole show in itself to talk about. And so we're not going to get into there, but talking about the day-to-day resources. Work this the way you would gang investigations. Work this the way you would other crime investigations. Actually go out and do community policing on it. It's the heart of it. And I know that sounds crazy, saying hello to these guys, making sure they know who you are. Obviously, if you're going to have a guy who's going to do undercover, don't have him be the person that says hello. But go out, meet the guys, meet with them on a regular basis. Because if they're out there, they're expecting to be seen. And it's for us to sit there and say we ignored them, most of the time that's going to give them a free rein to go further. But if we tell them we know them and we're out there and we're here to make sure that you have all the same rights and abilities everyone else does to be safe. So how can we do that to help you be safe? And take that attitude. Yeah. And that's gonna be huge as well.
And I think there's some dynamics to that too. The surveillance and all those things are fun, but there's something about physically meeting person face to face, learning their mannerisms, how they talk, how they walk, what's in their house, what's in their car. Those small encounters mean a lot as the investigator and also to the bad guy. But you learn about them, you learn their habits, which is really important. And I think you need to, at some point, you have to, just like you were talking about, you have to treat this like you would any other investigation. You have to walk up to them, you have to say hi to them, you have to give them a certain amount of respect to let them know that you're here to do your job, they can do their thing, but you're watching them. And if you come at them with a disrespectful attitude, 9 times out of 10 you're going to get shut down and nothing's going to happen. I know that one thing that worked really well and I'm a big fan of is you just give these guys a way to contact you. Walk up to them, give them your phone number, or whatever it is you want to give to them. You'd be surprised who calls you at 3 in the morning saying, hey, can you talk? Without some sort of two-way communication between these groups and without us at least saying hello to them, you can't just sit back and watch. And the head in the sand attitude and the approach doesn't work.
I think another thing that to be mindful of, and it's probably intuitive, but when you're looking at intelligence or you're looking at information which would suggest that you have a white supremacist extremist or that type of movement in your area of responsibility, make certain that you go over that intelligence, that information. If you're FBI, obviously we would deal with our assistant U.S. attorneys, but for the state and locals, I would make certain that you have your assistant county attorney or your district attorney on board with the intelligence and with the information, because oftentimes we were not able to make a material support charge, as it were, or any type of conviction along those lines, ideological lines. But it's at your disposal, it's at their disposal to suggest different avenues where you could take the investigation. Again, for us, in that case, firearms was an easy avenue. And I think it helps to get your prosecutor involved early, as opposed to bringing a nice worked up investigation that you as an investigator feel strongly about, and then bring that to the prosecutor and have it fail for one reason or another. I think that's imperative in these types of investigations, because oftentimes they can go off into civil liberties or privacy areas that typically are not ripe for prosecution for many prosecutors.
Do not overlook the contribution the correctional community can make, too. Currently, there's 1.6 million individuals in custody in the United States right now. In 2011, there was 6.98 million individuals that were in some sort of correctional care, either on supervision or actually in custody. The correctional community has an incredible ability to collect information. We have phone numbers, emails, correspondence, photos, validation packets regarding their affiliation to extremist groups. All of that is available, and it's something that needs to be leveraged by law enforcement and the intelligence community at large. So I would suggest that do not overlook that. Take advantage of it. It's information that's available. It's something that can be utilized very, very quickly, and it certainly can lead you down paths that you probably weren't quite necessarily aware of.
Sergeant Martinez mentioned it earlier, the secret squirrel stuff. Yes, there is always a time to hold your cards close, but we get a lot more information, a lot better ability to address the crimes, the trends, and the angles that we've seen when we're talking to each other. And it showed up here today. I'd never met Sergeant Martinez, but yet he knew 2 of my investigators by name, straight off from numerous phone conversations over the years about sharing information between Sacramento and Greensboro. And we're 3,500 miles apart from each other. But in the internet age and everything else, that's not very far at all. This is the perfect time to plug your involvement in fusion centers, in JTTFs, and in the different organizations that monitor and work the domestic terrorism side of things. Without that and without sharing that information, it does us no good at all. And it really will make all of us just little silos. And with that, we're not going to get anywhere. But right now, within the white supremacy, and especially when it comes to skinheads, when it comes to the Hammerskin Nation, when it comes to any of this, we're doing really well at sharing this information across the nation throughout investigators, and it's at the local level, state level, and federal level, and we have to maintain that. So I feel it's important to get that part out there. And if you're not sure where to start, please contact an investigator that has knowledge on this, and we can certainly provide resources with that. You have to pick up that phone, and you have to send that email, and you have to talk to your counterparts. And we've gotten a lot of success from being involved in the JTTF and from being involved in the Safe Streets Task Force in our area. And I would really push those. The multi-agency, the ability to get information out quickly into multiple sources at one time is unparalleled. And take advantage of that. Use that as your own tools to garner the information you need to make your city, your county, your state, and nation a better place. I mean, that's just what you need to do.
And it's also make use of unclassified networks such as LEO, particularly when you have special interest groups that are dedicated to the problems that we're discussing here. They can be invaluable. It's a great way to share information and build that connectivity.
We've covered several different resources that are available to all levels of law enforcement dealing with local white supremacists, and let me make sure I haven't missed any. We've got, we talked about prosecutors and having that great relationship with them, and it's certainly the great intel that we can get from the federal prison system as well as state and local, JTTF, LEO, but most importantly is just sharing that information and communicating with each other and our counterparts. The Department of Homeland Security would like to thank the FBI and the International Association of Chiefs of Police for their collaboration and partnership in development of this series. A special thank you to the agencies that have allowed their members to participate in today's discussion. Thank you for joining us.